Hello and welcome to Lynchburg Live. I'm your host, Linda Smith. Tonight's show is the second in a two-part series that we've done this month on forensics in the Lynchburg area. My guest tonight is April Rasmussen, RN, FNE. Probably many of you in the area are not aware that we have a forensics nurse program in Lynchburg. April is a forensics nurse examiner, and she'll be telling us tonight just what her job involves. April, welcome to Lynchburg Live. I'm so glad to have you as my guest.
Thank you for having me.
And as an RN, I've known, for a long time that we've had a forensics nurse examiner program in Lynchburg. Would you please tell our audience what your job involves?
I'd be happy to. What we are is registered nurses that work at the hospital out of the emergency department, and we are called in for victims of violence that present to the emergency department. And those patients include those of domestic violence, elder abuse and neglect, child abuse, sexual abuse and physical abuse, and adult sexual abuse, as well as your assault and batteries that come in.
What counties does your group of nurses serve?
We serve a wide range of counties. Some of the counties are Amherst County, Appomattox County, Bedford County, with the acknowledgement that Bedford Memorial Hospital has their own forensic nurses. It's up to the patient what hospital they choose to go to. We do Campbell County, Charlotte County, Danville, Halifax, Lynchburg, Nelson County, Prince Edward County, South Boston, Pittsylvania County, some of Buckingham County, and actually Russell County, which is in the southwestern panhandle of Virginia, calls us up on occasion and sends us patients.
All right, so this is a question I was going to ask you later, but here's a good place to put it. So instead of you going to the patient or going to the scene, they come into the hospital?
That's correct. Central Health's policy is that we are unable to go out from the hospital, so the patients do come to us, as well as many times they're there seeking medical treatment as well, so we see those patients within the emergency department.
I was going to say that's a heck of a large area for you to be traveling to.
Yes.
So, this has to work better for everybody involved, plus you're in a controlled environment with these people.
That's correct, and the controlled environment is very important for us to be in. However, when we end up going to court, we do have to travel to those areas at that time.
How many forensics nurse examiners are on staff?
There's 4 of us that work full-time.
Now, you said you work out of the emergency room?
Yes, we work under Centra's umbrella, Centra Health. But we are based in the emergency room at Lynchburg General Hospital.
Probably this is a question that will be impossible for you to answer just because it's an impossible question. But do you have any idea on a 1-month basis how many times you all are called out to do an investigation or whatever?
It's a question that is really based on the violence that's going on in the city and surrounding counties. So it fluctuates from month to month, but a general average would be between 50 to 70 patients a month. 50 would be usually the lowest end that we would see.
That's really a lot.
It's very busy.
To me, it's hard for me to wrap my head around what I think is a quiet area, a low crime area,
right.
Having that many people that you see on a monthly basis.
Yes, it's a lot, and that's just the patients that we actually come in for. If you think about the patients that we're called for but don't actually qualify for us to see, you're looking at probably at least 20 or better patients each month as well.
How long have you been doing this?
I've been doing forensic nursing for 11 years.
That's a long time.
It's a very long time.
What kind of training do you have to do this?
The national requirement for forensic nursing is to be a registered nurse.
Right.
And all of us are registered nurses, obviously. Central Health's requirement, as well as we want somebody with emergency room experience, and at a minimum of 2 years, because you are going to court and testifying. They teach nurses every day when you're doing your documentation to document as if you're going to court, but in our case, we're pretty sure that we are going to be going to court on those patients. And so you need to be able to answer a lot of questions and have a lot of experience from birth until the elderly patient, because you are having to testify to so many different areas. In addition to the emergency room experience, we go to a training called Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner training that is for adult and adolescents, and that is a 40-hour class that you take with what they say is 40 hours of clinical work. But when you actually get your clinicals completed, it takes about a year to complete that training. And the same with to do pediatrics, is you have a 40-hour class and then a 40-hour clinical training. And then to be a forensic nurse, you have a 40-hour class and then 100 hours of clinical, which takes about a year and a half to 2 years to complete.
Now, is that a certification?
Those are only to be verified in those areas. There is certifications that have been established for forensic nursing through the International Association of Forensic Nursing, and that is a sexual assault nurse examiner, adult and adolescent, and a sexual assault nurse examiner, pediatrics. And 3 out of 4 of our forensic nurses are certified in both of those. One is in the process of taking the test now, is actually waiting to hear her test results for the adult. And to kind of put it to what is out there for Virginia, is there's only 56 forensic nurses that are what we call SANE A, which is the adult and adolescent certified, and Centra has 3 of those 56.
That's wonderful that we have that here.
Yes, and there's only 17 in the state for pediatrics, and we have 3 of those 17.
That's good too.
Yes, we're
that
very
says
proud of that.
A lot for Centra Health. You know, I applaud Centra Health constantly for the innovations that they bring to our area, and you know, this is just another one of them.
Right.
Now, the areas of forensic nursing that are most commonly used in this area, you said are, would you tick those off for me again, just so?
It's our domestic violence patients, our assault and batteries, our child abuse, which includes our child sexual abuse and our child physical abuse, our adult sexual assaults, and our elderly abuse and neglect.
Do you personally interact with law enforcement a lot?
We do. For just about every case that we have, law enforcement is involved. Rape victims do have the opportunity to get evidence collected without reporting to law enforcement, even though we prefer that you go ahead and report to law enforcement because you lose so much evidence from the scene if you don't report. But otherwise, for domestic violence and assault and batteries, the law enforcement's usually at the hospital where we'll speak to them or follow up with what the patient's injuries are. For your sexual assaults that have approached somebody within 72 hours, then law enforcement is present for that when we do the evidence collection. They're in the emergency room and we're doing interviews together because we don't want to interview people too many times. So if we can do a joint interview instead of having separate people interview, then we will do that. And then, of course, with our child physical cases, then law enforcement's involved in that as well.
I think that's a really caring approach.
It is, and we're very kind of sticklers about that with counties that have sexual assault response teams, which is what the state is going for every county to establish, to try to decrease the amount of times patients are interviewed, whether it's an adult or a child.
That's good. Now, you just said that did the police bring the victims into the emergency room themselves, and then you see them immediately? It's an almost immediate thing.
It is. Victims come in multiple facets. They may come by law enforcement if they're bringing them in. They may come on their own. They may come by the emergency medical services. Or if we actually see our children that are sexually abused, we want to see them in 72 hours to collect the evidence for the rape kit. But if an abusive act has happened sexually within 1 year and a child has a difficult time being able to pinpoint time frames, so we actually see children up to a year after the sexual assault has occurred. And those children we can make appointments for during the daytime when we have office hours.
I would imagine that dealing with something like that is difficult.
It can be very difficult.
I would think so. What kinds of evidence are you responsible for gathering, physical evidence?
What we do is we talk to our patients if it's appropriate. Children, we limit again the interviews for that because we have a forensic interview team that have special training in interviewing children, so many times we may not do as much interviewing to the children. But we do interview the adults that bring in the children. We interview the domestic violence patients, assault and battery patients, as well as our rapes or elder abuse if they're able to tell us what happened. And then we know where to look for injuries when we interview them. We know where to look for evidence if it's a rape because they can tell us where fluids may have been placed on their body. And then we photograph any injuries that a patient may have, whether it's bruising, abrasions, tears, and then we collect any trace evidence that may have been established through the interview process with the victim of a rape. whether it's fingernail scrapings, mouth swabs, breast swabs, swabs from the genital area, just depending on what they said. Genital area we're always going to get, but the other areas is based on the interview.
Are you interviewing these children who are victims of sexual assault alone with these kids, or do you have someone there with you, a chaplain or anybody else, or is this just part of your training?
It is part of our training to talk to the children. Again, if a child is complained of a sexual assault and they fall into a area that has a forensic interviewing team that does the forensic interviews, then we may not interview those children at all. But for every sexual assault, whether it is an adult or a child, there's an agency called the Sexual Assault Response Team, which is your advocacy agency.
Right.
And that agency comes in and spends time with the child and spends time with the family and gives the emotional part, because we're the objective evidence collectors and don't really get into the emotional aspect, but recognize that there is a need for that. And so the advocates come in with us to take care of that aspect.
I just think it's great that you're there. Now, you brought an evidence collection kit.
I did.
Can you show us, tell us first what it's used for, and if you want to show us some stuff that's in there, that would be great.
First of all, what it usually is known as, and you've heard me say a couple times, is a rape kit, because that's how many people identify it. But the correct terminology for now is the physical evidence recovery kit. And this is the kit that, what it looks like. And this is when a victim has complained of a sexual assault within 72 hours. Then they present to the emergency room and we will do this kit. One thing that comes up many times when somebody has been sexually assaulted, whether it's from the patient or the police, that they say, well, I've already showered, I've showered 2 times, right. There's no need to come in. And of course we would prefer that you don't shower. However, a shower is not going to keep us from doing this kit. So don't let that make you not come forward just because you've already taken a shower. But when you open the kit up, and usually you will have an advocate in there if the patient chooses, the patient is given the option, but most of them prefer to have somebody in there with them. You have your instruction pamphlet that you have here, and then basically it's a bunch of envelopes and bags that you see us going through, right. And everybody has stickers that gets assigned to every envelope. And what you do is you draw some blood work for your DNA, and we also do STD testing on our patients for syphilis, and then we do a pregnancy test on all of our female patients, and then the DNA for the rape kit. And then basically it's based on the interview, and all these are envelopes that's full of swabs. So once we've interviewed the patient, we'll go through and try to figure out what envelopes we need, get the box organized for us, because when you open it up, it looks like a big mess.
Right.
And so we get it organized to what we need so that it can flow pretty smoothly for the patient.
And you're wearing gloves the whole time?
I'm wearing, yes, we're wearing gloves the whole time.
And so each bag is tagged and labeled with the patient's name?
Each bag is tagged and labeled with a number. The sticker has a number on it that comes with the kit. It's the same number for everything. And so you put that number on the kit, and then they identify it back to this box.
And that's for confidentiality?
That's for confidentiality. And I think just keeping everything labeled the same so it's all consistent.
Does your name have to go on this evidence collection thing to show that you are the person who's done the collection?
Yes. For every envelope that we open up, sorry about that.
That's all right.
There is a collected by area where we put our actual initials here. And then as you're doing the envelopes, it's a self-adhering envelope, and we seal it, and then we actually put our initials over the seal. So our initials are on the bag or the envelope at least 2 times. Right. For the slides, we do slides on some of the swabs that we take. And then in here, the slide is falling out of this one. In here, there's actually a place for us to write, and then we put our initials on the slide as well.
It looks complicated, but it's all very well planned out process.
It does, and actually it's a lot of envelopes and a lot of papers and looks very complicated, but unfortunately we're very used to doing them, so we can go through them at a pretty fast rate. Typically by the time a patient comes in that's complained of a sexual assault and needs an evidence collection kit, then you're looking at probably 2 to 3 hours for that to occur.
Tell me what steps you take to make sure that the evidence itself is not compromised, and where is it stored, that kind of thing.
We maintain chain of evidence with every bit of evidence that we collect. This box, where our office is behind a locked door, our exam room is within our office, which is behind another locked door. Nobody has access and nobody is allowed to come into our office except for the forensic nurses and our medical director without us present. When we collect this, we don't ever leave the PERT kit alone. We always keep the PERT kit with us until we hand it over to the investigating agencies.
That's great. That really is great. Now, you sent me a picture of a cope scope.
Yes, I did.
And B, if you'll put that picture up on the screen for us, we'll get April to tell us what that is, because the old ones that I'm familiar with never looked like that.
This is a little fancier model that we just got last year. This model, what it is a hands-free unit. It has a foot pedal, has a magnifying glass on it that we can increase the magnification to different levels, and then the screen shows us exactly what we're looking at the magnified level.
And what are you looking at?
This is where we do our vaginal exams.
Okay.
When we take children in there, tell them it looks kind of like a big old dinosaur, right, but it's really okay. And it doesn't do anything to hurt the child or the adult, but it allows us to get a magnified area to the vaginal area and the anal area. Many times you can look down there by the naked eye and not really see the injuries.
That's true.
And so we use the magnifying glass to document that. It's hooked to a flash drive, so our pictures go to the flash drive so we can directly download it onto our CD.
That's wonderful. It makes me wish I'd invented it.
Me too.
Thanks, B. All right. Now, you've taken many, many steps to ensure patient confidentiality. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell us about that? I mean, you, of course, all of our nurses have to sign a confidentiality agreement that you won't be talking about
That's
this
correct.
individual or what has happened.
Actually, in our program, we take it an extra step. We have the patient sign a consent form that says that it's okay to release our information to the state investigating agencies. So the patient knows that from the beginning, that that is what's going to happen with our information, unless they're non-reporting. Domestic violence, assault and battery, and your sexual assaults, again, can see us, and we can do the same steps that we would do if they were reporting, but we just hold that evidence back. But they're told that, you know, this information is not going to go anywhere else, including the forensic records. When we actually make a report on every patient that we see, and the photographs we download onto the computer, but it's placed in a forensic file. What we do is not placed in the medical record. Nobody has access to our information. No other nursing staff is able. It's a lockdown, secured record, so nobody can just type in a patient's name and see our records. And we do not even give our records to the patient that we're seeing because we keep it secure. If it's a child, the parents can't get that information because it's such a delicate nature of our charts that it's safer for us just to keep them locked down and only give them to the investigating agencies.
So it's not even, their name is never even in the computer system?
Well, it's in the computer system for a medical record, but not to show what
right.
it is.
I think that's certainly anybody who may be watching this show who may have a problem in the future and be reluctant to come because they think, oh, my next door neighbor or somebody who works at the hospital is likely to find out that I've been there with this problem. You know, that's a concern they just don't have to have.
That's right. And even for the emergency department, they have a tracking board where you can see who's in the department, and there is what you call a restricted access key for the tracking board. And as soon as our patients get registered, they get restricted access, where the physicians, the charge nurse, and the forensic nurses are the only ones. Even the regular ER nurses are unable to view those patients on the tracking board.
That's great. Now, are each of you trained in everything, like pediatric forensics, adult forensics, or are they just all part of a clinical?
We are all trained in everything.
Okay.
Everybody does the same thing, and we actually do 100% case review as well. So for every night when somebody's on call after hours, the next morning when everybody's back in the office, we do a case review, and that guarantees that there's consistency in our findings, that everybody's seeing the same thing.
It just sounds like it's so well organized, and you know, I just think it's a wonderful system that you all have.
We like to think so. Sometimes it feels like organized chaos, but we
I'm
like
sure
to think it's organized.
Now, how about cases of child abuse? Is that difficult to prove? I know you can't talk specifics, but just generally?
It can be difficult to prove, and one of your problems with the child abuse cases is many times the children can't talk or they're too afraid to talk. We do talk to all the adults to find out what their concerns are, to see if there's any inconsistencies in the story. We do a head-to-toe assessment on all children that we see to look at what marks are on their body. Is it marks that you would normally see in childhood play, or is it marks that would be in odd places that you would not expect to see injuries?
Right.
And if those marks are patterned or anything that would make you suspicious. We also look for what is the growth and development of the child. What is that child able to do, and with what they can do at that point, is that something that would cause those marks, or is it pretty hard for that child to get marks? For example, if a child is not rolling on the bed, it's going to be hard for him to get marks. There's a saying, if you don't cruise, you don't bruise. So we've got to look at what that child looks like with their body compared to what they're able to do. And then we work as a team. We have a multidisciplinary team in several of our jurisdictions, where investigation, social services, the sexual assault response program, if necessary, Commonwealth attorneys, and victim witness advocates all come together and discuss those cases and discuss the findings and have continuous interaction as to what may be consistent and what may not as the interviewing process and investigation process goes on.
I imagine it's pretty much the same with elder abuse too.
I think of elder just like children, truly,
Right.
because again, they have a lot of the same disadvantages where they may not be able to tell us what happens. They may not be somebody that's getting up and moving around, so you've got to look at who their caregivers are and what state of mind that elderly person's in.
You said that you do go to court, and I imagine that's a large part of your job.
It is. Between the four of us, I would say if we were to give an estimate of how much court, we're probably in the court 3 or 4 times a week, or at least have been subpoenaed for court.
Yep. Now, are you involved in any kind of crisis intervention? Or is that just part of the whole thing?
It is and it isn't, because again, we're objective evidence collectors. So what we're there for is to talk to the patient, find out what happened, and find out what the injuries are and what is the evidence to collect, with keeping in mind that the patients do need crisis intervention. So we give the referrals. We have the sexual assault response program that comes in for the children that have been abused and the adults that have been sexually assaulted. We will call the domestic violence shelter if we need somebody to respond if they're able, or to place that patient in a shelter. We let the victim witness advocates know that if we need them for that patient. So we do provide the crisis intervention. And if the patient needs a mental health exam, where they're feeling like they may need some additional services, then we'll actually have that patient registered in the emergency room and do the mental health crisis intervention.
That was a question I was going to ask you. I'm glad you answered it, because I wondered if you were also the person who refers these people to the agencies, the proper agencies. We only have about 5 minutes, which surprises me. Does that not surprise you?
It does surprise me.
That this is that goes fast. Do you ever deal personally with perpetrators of crimes?
And actually, that's a good question. A lot of times we don't know that we're dealing with perpetrators of crime, because you may have a child come in and the parent that actually did the abuse brought the child in, but they're not telling us. So many times we don't know that we are. It may come out later in the investigation, may still come out while it's in the hospital. When we first get involved, we may not know. The same with domestic violence victims. If they've escorted the patient to the hospital, they may still be there. We do, for our sexual assaults, there's a few counties at times that need us to do a suspect physical evidence recovery kit on the suspect, so the investigator will bring the suspect in for us to collect that evidence from them. But that goes from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. We usually don't have to do that.
Do you ever think of yourself as being in an unsafe situation?
I do. There's been a few times where our safety has been a little concerning. Security is very active when we say that we have concerns. We have a security button in our office where we can push it, and security knows that they need to be there quickly if that happens. And times that where you're cautious walking out to your car because you don't know if somebody's going to be upset with you.
That's frightening, but you run into those situations if you're not in this kind of job.
That's correct.
So it always pays to be as prepared as you possibly can. What are your hours?
We have office hours Monday through Friday. We don't really have set hours because it's going to depend on when our court is. If we've been on call the night before and we're up to 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, we may not make it back by 10. But somebody is going to be in there during the office Monday through Friday. Typically our hours are 9 to 5. Then there is always somebody on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if it's after office hours, then we have a 1-hour response time from the time that we're paged that we need to be back at the hospital.
If anybody were interested in finding out more about forensics nursing, is there a website that they could go to?
There is a website. It's www.iafn.org.
Okay. Now, this is what I consider a job that takes a really special person. If you were giving advice to someone who were interested in this kind of career, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that it is a very interesting job. It's very rewarding at times and very sad at times.
I'm sure.
It takes a lot of dedication and a lot of patience, and it's a very good job to have. I absolutely love my job. But you have a lot of ups and downs. Mentally it can be hard, physically it can be exhausting when you're up all night, but it's a very rewarding job in the end.
Yeah. April, I thank you so much for being my guest and for sharing this information with Lynchburg. I just think it's very important that people know that this kind of help is available to them and that they don't have to go it alone if they end up being the victim of a crime.
That's right, and I'm glad to put that out there.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed watching tonight's show on forensics nurse examiners and that you enjoyed this two-part series on forensics in the Lynchburg area. Please stay tuned for our next show. The topic of that show will be announced when it's presented. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.